a Beretta Silver Hawk from the 1950s that I've already been working on a long time. This is one of those slow burn projects that's just creeping its way through the shop, and it's got to get out of here. So I fixed the stock, and we've got one other repair we're going to have to do down here to the barrel. Ooh, dear, what caused that? We'll talk about that later. The big thing that I'm dealing with here is going to be we're missing a trigger, man. One of the triggers is gone. The front trigger is gone. And, you know, you're not going to find parts for this. The 24-hour Silverhawk parts store is long closed. So let's fabricate a trigger for a 1950 side-by-side double. Let's go. Well, how do we attack a job like this? What's the engineering? Well, step one's going to be get a little bit of croil on that screw right there and a little bit of croil on this pin, because I have not taken this action apart, and I'm going to have to admit to you, I've had it for a long time, and I get the wood fixed, and I just need to figure this. What are we going to do with this thing? Well, there's a pivot pin located right there, and then on top of that pivot pin there is a shoe, and we'll take this out and look at it, that comes downhill and up to a safety protuberance, right, and down, and right there, that piece is the same for the front and back trigger. In fact, we could put that rear trigger in the forward position and it would work. It's just that gets awfully inconvenient to do. The only difference between this trigger and the one we're going to make is the one we're going to make is going to have the shoe up here. It'll be a lot more sculpted, so we'll bring it down there like that, and that's how I should have drawn it, but I'm reaching around the camera here. And then it'll come back up and do this, right? Yeah, easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? But how, if you look at that picture in 3 dimensions, how do we rationalize the fact that we've only got a piece of flat stock to work with, and we really want a nice fat trigger blade on it like this? How are we going to do that? Well, most of you folks watching this series right now haven't seen some of the stuff we did 2.5, 3 years ago. In fact, some of the stuff from beyond 3 years ago isn't even up anymore. So we're going to do another one, and it's going to involve heat and a lot of banging. I croiled this about a half an hour ago, and then Bruno and I stopped and ate lunch here. And this screw has seen better days, and it's got a really weird attack angle, you see. Very hard to get directly on this. But I'm just going to bump this and see if we're going to get lucky, and we got so lucky. So what I'm doing right now is sacrilege, because I'm not applying even torque across the screw head. And I don't know if you can see it, but the top of that head is kind of chewed up, and we're going to have to work on that later. So let's see here. We got the screwdriver in there. And then, of course, because it's tipped, only the right side of this thing is actually doing any work, which is why I came back up with the smaller screwdriver in an attempt to take it around a corner, and it has yielded. So we needed to get this screw out of here first. There are other options to this. There's the angled screwdriver option, but even in this case, we would have had to have made a very custom, very flat tool where we had the edge, we slid up into apply torque down here, and then we pushed down on it with something else. But we got that out. Why are we going after that? Well, that's got to come out so that we can pull the trigger guard away, because I don't want it in the way. Then we got to take the safety out. And there's probably a screw sticking right down in there. And if you look at this, I'll change the lighting on it. You'll see that this is keyed here and here. And if you've got a screw going all the way down into that bottom plate, it holds it together and allows the draw bolt to pull back on it and suck the whole thing down into the head of the stock. So we're going to have to get this clear in order to be able to work on what we want to work on. So this came off, so then I should be able to just push that screw up, fly in with a pair of needle nose and pop that out. Okay, what have we got to do now for getting this safety out here? Okay, there's a pin. As this rides in and out, let me get the light right. There it is. You have to put up with the light for a minute here. There is a pin through the top of that this rides over. Driving that pin should release. The safety in this arm should float right out the top. So we're going to want to push down on this. See, and it's almost falling out of the hole right there. There it is. Okay. So it came away, and I've got the pin. And I make like an impound up on a bench. You can't see it back here, but I'm trying to keep these screws away, because if you aren't careful, let me put them right here where you can see them. If you bounce on the bench, these things will move, or more importantly, they'll get drug out on your screwdriver, and that's how a lot of this stuff leaves the bench. That's not my primary objection in magnetic stuff. My primary objection in magnetic tools is all that little granular swarf that you drag up inside the gun here. All right, so with that off, with that pin out, and I don't know, I've never taken one of these apart before. Okay, there's a lever here, and this lever says that when I open the gun, it pushes back on this lever, which pushes back on the safety and engages it. The reason for that is that if you close the gun with your finger on the trigger, the minute the gun shuts, it'll go off. And that's why those safeties are in there. All right. So now we'll get this out. Now our fitting procedure is going to be, we do nothing to this. Every single thing we do to the original part or to the part we're going to make, is going to be hand fit to maintain this inner relationship. And we'll just have to go from there. So that's out of the way. We're not worried about clearing this screw or that spring or this retention screw for the safety on feature. We're going to leave that alone. All right. And amazingly, without a front trigger, this doesn't fight us coming off. Usually, you'll get an interference right here, and you'll have to know to lift the trigger, and you want to watch you don't drop the hammers. We'll go through all that later. Right, here we go. So now the trigger guard's off, and there are two stupid thin screw slots here. And I want to talk about screw slots for a second and how to not screw them up. I've talked about this before, but I think it's going to matter right here. The screw slot, and in this particular case, it's not really that deep. This screw slot right here, there's the head, and this particular screw does not have an angle on the edge here. This particular screw is just set up like this. All right, here we go, and then we're into the threads down here, okay? What we're going to want to make sure we do is we're going to want to make sure that we touch the inside of this slot all the way down. This is a parallel ground screw. All right, and we want to make sure that we touch all the way down. Now let's look at the slot from the top. What we don't want to do is touch here and touch here, because if we do that, it produces some really horked up, well, gee, look at that. There's one right there. Let me see if I can get the light on it. Your screw heads wind up looking like this, and they're all ate up and wonked out, and we don't want to do that. So we're going to grind a screwdriver that's wide and just wide enough that it fits all the way in and then doesn't start its rollout. A conventional screwdriver is kind of a wedge shape. And when the wedge shape goes in, it touches right there, and we don't want that. So we're going to parallel grind a screwdriver, and what that's going to look like is we've got a stone that rotates this way, right? And we're going to lay this this screwdriver down on it in such a way that here's the center of rotation, here's the tangent point, and we want the head of the screwdriver to be right there. And then we'll flip it over and do the other side, and you wind up with a screw that looks like that, and it's parallel for the last 5 to 10%. Right there is parallel, all right? You don't want it to be much longer than that because this is a very weak screwdriver. And in fact, the ultimate way to shape it would be to just put it on a milling machine and cut something that looks like this. However, it's quicker to do it on a wheel. Okay, so I've got my vise rolled over sideways and rolled back up on the bench, and the setup looks like this. What I'm attempting to do here is get the screwdriver end to be perpendicular to the long axis. So, not long axis, wrong words, but if you were to draw a line through this wheel, I would like the top of that to meet at about a 90-degree angle. Use your imagination here. So I've got the butt of the screwdriver sitting on the bench. And the beauty of this is you can set the perpendicularity of this rig. See what I'm saying? Right there on perpendicular, and now I'm coming below it. You follow? And in order to track that, I'm going to Sharpie down one of these blades. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about, because we're really thick. I picked a very thick one to do this. This particular stone does not have to be rotated very quickly in order to get a lot of work done. And we do not want to heat this thing up to the point where we have to dunk this in a piece of water and listen to it hiss. Because if we do that, we're thermally stressing this tip, and it'll get hot, get cold, get hot, get cold, it'll crack. And those of you that have been putting a lot of torque on a screwdriver have a crack and hose up the outside of the finish on a gun. Don't do that, all right? So we're going to find the perpendicularity right there, and you can see it lays in it, all right? And then I want to make sure that I'm on the money this way also, because while that's perpendicular, that's wrong, okay? So we'll lay that up there, get that right, and then I can kind of take this thumb, set that down into the bench, and then I know where it's going to go. So let me see if I can get this right here. So now we can look and we can see that I was a little bit high there. So I need to slide the screwdriver up just a bit. And if I'm low, I'll get a mark on the bottom. I'll get a mark down here, okay? So we want to get right in the middle of that and make sure that we're on the money. Okay. I got this set, and I'm going to put my thumb right there so I can feel how hot it's getting or not getting hot. And then you don't want this thing to rotate too much. There would be cutting one side of the blade, that would be cutting the other. You're looking for a completely perpendicular presentation. All right. So I'm still a little high, but I'm getting there. It's coming down. You can see the sheens all the way across. I can touch the blade. And I got news for you, man. There's magnetic stuff being generated everywhere. And it's landing on the bench. And we don't want to drag that into the action. So when we go to put the action together, we'll do it over fresh towels. Rotate and come off on the other side. Now, I just flipped that over and very nonchalantly put it up against the stone. I will tell you that this is not the first time I've ever done this. And when I hold my thumb up in the air, it's not because everything's okay. It's because I'm trying to tell you I got a thumb in opposition to my four fingers. Yeah. We've cut this down, and it fits, and there is hard to see in this shot, but an ever small amount of space here and here. And in fact, when we're done with this, Bruno's going to take a still, and he's showing it to you while I'm saying this. You don't want to go all the way across the slot so that you don't get into the mortise on the actual side. Now, I've got this enough, and I'm not hitting it very hard. I'm just making sure that it's settling all the way into the slot, and I'm not hitting it very hard. I'm just tapping it just a little bit to make sure we have 100% contact. Because the danger here is that we torque this screw, we torque this bit, it snaps and puts a big gouge in the top here. All right, and I'm also showing you guys some stuff. Ordinarily, I try to not show you guys things that the average guy can't do at the shop, but in this particular case, The average guy is not tearing a 60-year-old side-by-side down either. So just know that I'm showing you guys some things that you do have to have a proper vise and a proper bench and the proper tools to do. So just know that. Okay, I'm going to show you this setup, and ordinarily I would be over here, but it's not going to photograph well. I'm going to bring this wrench down so that it'll actually turn on this. And then we're going to take the screwdriver, push down, and then with my finger here, I'm just bumping this backwards to see, and I've coiled this screw before, if we can get this thing to come loose. Go back the other way, forward, backwards, forwards. We'll walk it a little bit. And I'm going to tell you what, man, this screw is really fighting us. So I'm going to take another bite at it. I'm going to come over and move this over just a little bit, because we were flexing this tip pretty good. And I have coiled it before. I did coil it. Now, am I into the sides of the action? I don't know. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to duck out here. You're going to see a fade. I'm going to go kiss this on my bench grinder and just knock the corners off it. All right, you can see I took just the corners off of it. I gave it a little haircut just to make sure, because we don't know what we've got in here. And a lot of this torque I was doing might have been trying to deform the metal on the, trying to deform the metal. All right, here we go. There we go. All right, we're out now. We had to do a little bit of editing there because I'm reaching in front of the camera. I'm trying to do everything, but there's a lot of black schmutz coming up because we don't know the last time this screw's been out of the hole. We'll wind this out. Now watch out that there's not a spring, and some guns there's a detent plunger underneath this thing, although I suspect that would be back here on this gun. But just make sure that when you clear the mortise with this, you keep enough downward pressure on the screwdriver that if there is a spring pushing up for, say, a bolt hold open or cocking pieces or whatever, and in this particular case, we can definitely see, and give me a focus, bud, the head of that screw does have a slight rebate to it, and we might very well have been into the edges of the screw mortise. So that was a successful screw removal, and we were able to do all that and not hork up the top of this engraved screw. So I've custom ground another point, and it rolls out in order to do this top. Now, we're not the first guys in this gun. If you can run your finger over a screw and you get cut, you're not the first guy to go in there, and I'm not claiming anything other than that. So now I've got it mounted hard in the vise. I've taken the pad out of the vise, and I've actually got the aluminum jaws grabbing it so that this thing won't give. And what you see is I'm back here leaning into this thing. You might hear me brushing up against my mic a little bit, but I'm leaning into it, and then you take your fingers and you just kind of close them around the screwdriver, and it gives you a lot of torque, and you can bump this thing. Now, okay, we got really freaking lucky because this screw is that long, and like when we took the Burgess apart, there were an awful lot of opportunities for this screw to rust into this hole. I mean, that flipping screw is that long, so let's take it out and have a look at it. And the other two screws had a lot of schmutz up inside the mortise here, and we'll see what that looked like. Yeah, there's a little bit of corrosion there, but the croil is penetrated all the way down about halfway. I mean, the croil got all the way up the shaft, and that might have been our salvation, because you can see all this. This is all active corrosion that's now oil soaked. I'm sorry, the screw is patinaed. So that screw comes out, and we're just going to knock this loose, and we're going to make sure before we rotate it if there's an up and down. Well, I'm going to tell you what, there's a punch mark right there, and there's a punch mark right here. So somebody's trying to tell, and I'm not the guy that put that punch mark in there. We are not the first guys up inside this thing. I'll say that again. Okay, so this goes away. And then I've got to decide whether or not that sear pin goes all the way through. But man, it doesn't make any sense that it would. It doesn't make any sense that they would capture this bottom plate that they've just pinned down with 2 screws up here. All right, in the interest of full disclosure, I was off camera and I'm like, there's no way. So I stuck this I'm going to call it a spud for lack of a better word. You'd call it an awl. I put it in there and I give it a little tap. And I was giving it a little tap. You can see the bottom metal just popped right off. So no, it didn't go through. And I'm glad I didn't freak out. And the other thing we found out is it's in 2 pieces. I had no idea. I've never been in this gun before. And you can tell because it's not my MO to leave this kind of garbage inside. So I've never been up inside of this. This is the piece we really needed. This is the part we're going to be working with for the rest of the exercise so we can make another one of these shoes. We'll take it out and dimension it, figure out what it's got, and we'll get on with it. The rest of this, the reason why I put on my tickets clean, oil, and inspect, and the reason why I don't like ultrasonic cleanings is that if you ultrasonically clean this, you miss the opportunity to push your eyeballs up inside here and take a look. And I will tell you that for something that's been in the field long enough to have broken parts, this thing is spectacular up inside. Warning, mainspring. Warning, mainspring. Avoid at all costs. Yeah. So how are we going to make this thing? And how do we measure it? Well, I got to tell you, I've drawn this part large so we can take a look at it. The sear bar, that's the part here that we have to push down in order to drop the hammer, all right? So there's a couple of critical parts in here. Where this sits on the frame right there determines it's all rotation about this axis right here. When we pull the trigger, this thing rotates about this pin. So everything is going to be based upon where the center line of this pin is. So we're going to drill that hole first. And when we drill that hole, then all the other measurements are going to get pulled off that hole, because that's the only thing that doesn't go. So when this rotates, this part moves down, this part moves up. The safety is right there. So that's the safety. And what we want to be able to do is when that safety slides over the top of this piece, we want it to trap it up against the frame at that arrow in such a way that this is just not pushing on the sear. If we leave too much room under here, this trigger will rattle. They don't have feather springs on these. Sometimes you'll see on these triggers, you'll see a hole drilled right about where the end of the Sharpie is, and there's a really fine, called a feather spring, because it's lead as a feather. We don't have that. Then, once we cut all this out, we're going to leave an extra piece of material down here. We're going to leave this down here. And then we can go up and fit this thing. Actually, you know what? No, we're going to do it like this. This is going to be a hole we're going to drill right there. And then we can take this whole thing and put it up on top of the vise. And we're going to beat on it this way with a torch. And when we beat on it that way, this thing is going to flare out and you're going to get that flare. Then when we get all this right, we'll come in here and we'll make a saw cut this way like this. And then this will leave the trigger sticking down like that once we get this hot and roll it back. That's kind of the order in which I think we're going to need to do it in. So one last thing I'm going to say is this. Everything on this bench has got to go away now. Wood, parts that are engraved that we don't want to get messed up. We're getting ready to do fab work. So what I'm going to do now is clear the bench off. We're going to go over to the big vise and start saw cutting and start banging on stuff, and we'll talk about it. So all we'll have is this drawing, this trigger, this piece of metal here that we're going to make the cut that just happens to be the right thickness, and that'll be about it. So we're going to transition to metalwork, and we'll be back. I took some silver Sharpie marker, but you could use rattle can paint. You could use anything. This is a piece of hot roll steel, and this is actually a very hard oxide layer that will eventually grind through. But for right now, to see the marks that we want to put on this thing, I just got some contrast and we'll grind through it. This stylus has a point on it, And what we're going to do is just take a rough outline. So this area down here is the part that was in the dotted line. That's about all the extra material I'm going to need to do in order to be able to fold this up and turn it into that shoe, and then we can cut the side off of it. So I'm just pushing down on it. We're going to slide back just a bit. I want extra room everywhere. I want to file this thing a size. So that's the rough location of the hole. This is the rough location of where it sits down on the frame, and I'm just going to scab this in. These are just guidelines. We're going to measure all of this as we go, but this will just give me a rough idea of where to cut to. And as we're scribing through all this, you'll see when I come up that there's actually an outline in it, and we're just going to come down there like that. So I'm going to try to light this and show you that there is actually an outline in it. Yeah, there it is. There's a very light outline. It's hard to pick up, but you got to believe me that it's in there. So here's the back cut. This is the line coming up right here, and then it runs over. Okay, so we'll center pop this, get it up on the light. We're going to drill this hole, and all of the other dimensions are going to radiate out from that. So we'll take a pair of dial indicators, and we'll just kind of say here to here, here to there, and we'll mark all these holes, and then we'll trim it down to that, up to the vise. Center pop the hole in the plate, and we're just going to run a 5/64 drill through it because that's within a very small amount of being the right size. Now, this is a soft piece of steel. This piece of steel is not holding hammers cocked. It's not preventing accidental discharges. All it is doing is rotating and rotating apart. So we really don't give a tinker's damn about the temper on this thing. It doesn't have to be hardened. There's nothing specific about it. And in fact, if this piece of hot roll was not enough to do what we had to do, we got engineering issues in the gun. All right, so we've drilled that hole, and all other measurements are going to radiate out from that hole. So the first part I'm going to do is delineate the outside of this. One of the big deals about doing metalwork is you got to figure out how the heck to hang on to it. So if I cut this part all the way down to its finished dimensions, how do I hang on to it while I'm trying to file it? So we're going to leave this entire rear area back here as a big tab so we can hang on to it, bend it, file it, grind it, do whatever the hell we want to do, and at the end we'll just cut the tab off. So you're going to see that. I'm just going to go ahead and get a little bit of hacksaw work done here, and we'll talk to you in a minute. In these couple of photos you can see here, I've hacksawed away most of the top part. The pencil is pointing to a dimple that I've made for the radius hole I want to drill. But right now all that metal that's remaining on the bottom and on the back is how I'm going to hang on to this thing in the vise, like this. So like I said, I've got to use an oxy-acetylene torch in order to be able to get enough heat, because this thing is a mammoth heat sink. And actually, I want my blue. Here we go. So we're just going to kind of get it hot here. And when I'm done, the entire top of this vise will be very, very hot. And you got to make sure you don't touch it. There'll be a long cool down time. We'll add some acetylene there. We'll add a little of that oxygen. We'll get a little more fire going here. You'll notice I'm not swinging his hammer real hard. I'm just bouncing it. We'll persuade all this metal to move. And the reason why I've got it so close to the top of the vise is because I would really like to have a sharp edge on the back. I don't want it to be rounded over and amorphous. So we'll get this hot. And the other thing you got to remember is this hammer's getting all hot, and you don't want to touch the hammer either. But it'll begin to give you this, it'll begin to flare here. You can, I don't know if you can see it. I've got these goggles on because the goggles cut the glare really well. It's getting a pretty good flare to it. We'll switch to a larger hammer here. Now it takes a long time to heat this up because this vise top is sucking all the heat out of it, but that pretty much beat that down flat there. Remember, the top of the vise is hot, your hammers are hot, everything is hot. It's a good time to go have a Thin Mint. Go find a Girl Scout and buy a Thin Mint. Me? I'm gonna have a cigar. So I've got a double out. This is a Spanish double with particularly decent architecture. So I've robbed where they have their front trigger for this, and I've drawn it on the towel. And I've done that just to get an optical alignment. You can see the hole that we drilled through it in the front up there in order to get it right. So now this kind of lays down on that, and that tells me how far I had to make that saw cut. Now this saw cut right here that runs up this way, here, let me set this thing down here, hang on to that. So this saw cut right here is going to determine where we're going to make this bend, and this whole thing is going to bend around, and when it bends around, I'll be able to get a file up behind it and clean this thing up. So this has just been a lot of hacks on. You didn't miss anything. It's just a lot of hacks on. After we got some thickness on this, shoe, and once I get it around the corner and I get it all right, we'll clean it up with files and it'll look sharp. And then they'll have this little rib in the back so that it's got some structural integrity, and the rib will tail to almost nothing. So that's kind of where I'm at. So where we're going to go now is, bear in mind that vise is still so hot you can't even touch it because I did have an oxyacetylene torch near it. Your hammers get hot, everything gets hot. Don't try this unless you got your head on a swivel. So let's go bend this. Now, when we bend this again, we do not need an oxyacetylene torch because we'll grab it down here and we'll be able to heat it up enough to put a nice gentle curve in it, and we'll just keep matching our curve to this, and we know that our departure angle has got to be something in the order of, it's got to be about down here like that. So let's go bend this. I've set this white tub down behind it so you can kind of see what I'm doing. We're going to start our bend. Now, I know this is way too long, but it's my trigger shoe stretcher is out of commission. So we get it hot up here near the top. Let me shut this off, see if this looks any better. There we go. As this starts getting hot, it'll throw off kind of a glow. You'll see that umbra starts to turn red. And we can do this now with a propane torch because we're not wicking all the heat off to the vise. So we can get that a little bit red and start that coming around, and we can just work it around. And it'll bend where the heat is. So if you don't want it to bend down here yet, don't put the heat there. And we know we don't have a lot of bend in this. The major bend's got to happen here. So we just needed a little bit of curve in the shoe. And a little bit of a curve in the shoe. And we'll talk later about how this trigger is actually bent a little bit off axis in order to get it in front of your hand. And now that I've got some curve in it, we don't need much. Get it hot down here, and now we're going to start the major bend. You cannot do this cold. If you do this cold, you will snap this. Let me switch hands here. Okay. I'm pulling on the pliers while I'm bending down. I'm pulling to the right of the camera in order to get this to bend right there. Almost there. Again, these pliers are getting awful hot doing this. So you got to be careful what you touch. Now we're going to clean all these corners up with a file. We're going to radius all this and make all this look pretty. Now that we can get at all of it. Probably over bending a little bit there. Okay, so let me shut the torch off. We're going to take it over and I'm just going to make a quick check. We're pretty much right on the money. I would like it to come a little bit further forward. So what I'm going to do here is scrunch that and touch this angle just a bit. Gonna go a little bit more. All right. And now we need to make a radius here. And how do you make a radius? Well, we have to take something that's the right diameter and pound on it. So what we'll do next here is we're going to go ahead and mount this in the vise, and then we're going to get it hot and tap on it and walk it around the corner. Okay, that's pretty much where I want it, and it lines up with the drawing. We're going to let all this cool off, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. We're up on top of my soft jawed vise now. I've cut the bottom off of this because it was just in the way. I knew we were pretty close to where we wanted it. And I've done some preliminary filing. We'll get into the mess of filing here later because we have a lot of excess material back here that's still left right there. And how do you know where that is? Well, you put the pin in here. Remember we said that hole was going to be what we were going to measure from. And I don't even have these things on. All I'm doing is using them as a set of snap gauges. I know that basically I want that distance to be about that far. So I set it, and then we take the pin and stick it back in here, and now we can just measure off the nose of the pin. We don't have to be on the center line to just set distances here, and all I'm doing now is scribing in some Sharpie marker, and I'm scribing a line on that I can see in the Sharpie marker, and I don't know how well it's, there it is. So you can see there's a silver line across that. It's close enough. We're not measuring this thing to thousandths, but if you try to do this, you try to stack this over the top and then draw lines down, and you've got a lot of parallax here, and you don't want to deal with the parallax. You can do it that way, but it gets a little rough. I've got the part mounted up in the vise right now, and I've got that line that we just scribed flat. You can just come in here and file all this off. You can do that unless you're a lazy old fart like me. So now up on the back end of this here, we drilled a hole there that simulated that arc. So I know that hole, the leading edge of that and the leading edge of that are the same. So there's a piece of material here we got to get rid of, and we're just going to come in with a saw and slice that off. All right, so we're getting close here. Now, we were able to just hack that piece off because the ledge that sets where this thing rotates down is this ledge. So I'm nowhere near that. This will be a straight file in as we're getting ready to go, because I don't want, that's a critical surface, and the top of this are a critical surface, and those will get fit when we get up inside the gun. We're actually pretty close. We got to do a little bit of mouth work. We got to take a little bit off the front end of the mouth here, and we'll do that. Bruno might have to move the camera because I got to come over on this side. So I'm just taking a file and rolling it that way. You can't see through the file, and I know that, but I'm just knocking a little bit of this off because it's really way too much of it. Now at this point, while we're out here on the vise, we can go ahead and clean this trigger blade up. And the trigger blade, we're going to try to mimic the design features of the other one. So we're just going to give it a nice rollover. Oops, not quite tight enough here. Let's go a little tighter. And this isn't chattering or fighting me, so I know that I've got it. It's going to be strong enough to perform its duties as a trigger. Yeah, I know that sounds horrible, but just deal with it. Okay, and then I'm going to bring the back up. I think I might reset this a little bit. So I want to get all, there's a lot of excess material here on the back. And let's see, I think I can do it this way. So I'm not, the pressure profile in this file is cut, and the pressure profile is lift and cut. So it's really, so you can hear I'm pushing down on the front stroke and just letting it glide on the back stroke. If you scrub on it both ways, what you'll wind up with is a dull file and a crappy looking part. I don't know if it's showing up, but you can tell where you're cutting by the glare coming off the back part of the bench. And I'm actually getting pretty close to that. I want some thickness to this trigger. I don't want it to be kind of limp there. I don't, some of these triggers in some of these older guns, they're like fat. They're like just like a piece of wire, and they're not rigid enough for me. Yes, I'm filing this in a really crappy orientation just so that you can see it. I'm going to switch over now to a round file so I can come up inside this, and I got to move this out just a bit. All right, and then so I'd like all of this to taper. I want it to taper from maximum thickness to minimum here. I'd like it to bulge out and taper around. It should all just be one continuously smooth curve is what we're looking for. And we're pretty much getting there. It's got to be smooth with no discontinuities. Now, if we were building a muzzleloader, we'd be carving little filigrees in this and everything, but blissfully today, we are not. Okay, and while I got it here, I'm gonna take a little bit more off of this. All right, and the rest of this is pretty much gonna get done with some crocus cloth and some needle files. We'll come in and we'll clean all this up, and we'll make sure that we have we're getting pretty close. Just knock that burr off so I don't get cut alive on that. Take that burr off. When we're all done, and right now I can't do this, when we're all done, we need to be able to pressure rub our fingers all over this and not get cut. It needs to be that smooth. This part here, you can rub your fingers on it and not get cut. Don't leave sharp edges for the next guy. All right, so in high resolution, here's where we are now, and we'll cover. I've taken a little bit of crocus cloth and rasped over that, and now I've got this part, and it's pretty close to this part, but it's missing in several places. It's Shark Week. I don't know. So we'll see. We're going to try to insert these, and typically in these double guns, the rear trigger has to go in first because the front trigger will get in the way, and it needs to be brought up in here like that, and then brought around the corner. Now we got a little bit of excess material in places, so I might have to use just a bit of a hammer cap to get that up in there. I've got both triggers installed now, and I'm going to put the spacer in because we're getting to the point where it's starting to matter what's in the way. Okay. We got to get that touching that blade, and we have to get this, and all this has got to get done probably 5, 6, 7 times in a row. You got to do all this. So let me get that kicked up right there, grab it, and get my fingers out of the way. So that spacer's got to go down in between here. And again, I'm working at a really crappy mechanical advantage, so just bear with me. All right. Put that in there. Give that a little nudge forward, and we should be right on the money. Yes, this is a pain in the neck, and you gotta endure it. You gotta endure it. All right, let me give it a little bit more clearance here. We'll run that in a little bit, so then maybe this will pop in. Okay. I'm married to the fact that I want you guys to see what I'm doing, and that's the real problem. Ordinarily, you would just rejig this. You would rejig it. There we go. Now we got it. Now we get it to go through that one. We got to make sure we got this hole lined up. There it goes. And we're back. I picked it up, put it up on top of the vise, and beat on it and got it down in there. This is all the motion. And you see here that this trigger is actually able to move the other one. We got to go get rid of that. There's something up, there's an interference up underneath here. So we don't want to do that. See, and then that one, when you pull the rear trigger should not move the front. So we'll go after that. And all you do here is you go around and clean it up, clean it up, clean it up. Get rid of all the interferences. And then we know we got to come down a little bit further because this shoe here has to come up as high as this one, pretty close. And then we're going to get to the point where we're going to put it in a gun. So what I'll do is I'll take this trigger back out, convoluted evolution. The pin's got to come out. Both triggers have to come out at the same time because there's a mutual interference. I'll trim a little bit off the bottom of that notch so that it'll settle in a little bit further. Put it back together again when I get it all the way right. Draw file the top of this, draw file the top of that, and then we'll put it on and talk about where it is at the sears. Did you get all that? Good, because I sure as hell didn't. This gun has what's called Anson and Dealey hammers. And what you're looking at right there at the end of this punch is the actual firing pin, and it reefs up. So it's very important you don't snap the hammers on an Anson and Dealey gun, because eventually you will lead to, on the next episode of Anvil, we refiring pin an Anson and Dealey hammer. Yeah, no, we ain't doing that. Okay. So by clamping this receiver onto the barrels with the forend iron snapped in, when we go to open the gun, we'll notice what's going to happen here. As we lay on the cocking pieces, the hammers come to the rear. You see that? So when the hammer comes to the rear, I can lift this sear all day and it does nothing. And in fact, I can actually lay it back down and the hammer will go down. So I can come up and cock this. So if we do our trigger fitting with the action open like this, we can control the energy in the mainsprings and not be snapping hammers all over the place when we're lining stuff up. This is the end product of all of our trigger plating. Okay, I've come in and I've removed material that the rear trigger was binding on. We've got the noses down at exactly the same altitude, and we've got the tails at the same altitude, and it all goes together. Any superfluous remaining filing that has to be done back here on this trigger, I'll do later. Save yourself the cosmetics for later on, because it's taking up time you don't want. All right, the other thing to note is this. Let me relight here. Here we go. So as we lift this up and we set the sear tail out, the sears set in different places between when it's cocked and when it's not cocked. If you did all of this fitting and the hammers were down, you'd be wrong. They need to be fit with them cocked like this. So the noses of the pins settle underneath, and then this pops up on this particular gun. And I'm going to go ahead and take the screw and I'm going to run it home because I want to know what this looks like when it's right. We've got our custom screwdriver that we ground in the beginning. It fits exactly in the slot, and we don't hork anything up just because we're doing testing. If there was a lot of testing, if I knew I was going to be in and out of here 20 or 30 times, I would have made a bespoke screw with a T-handle on it. It looked a lot like a stockmaker's inletting screw that would hang on to that. So what we're looking for here, we take the weight off the hammers. We've got a lot of slop here. See? And then as we start putting the weight back on the hammers, we have just a little bit of slop. Just a little bit. I got my butt kicked about 4 years ago by an over and under that would not cock sometimes. And I had that gun for about 9 months, and I finally took it out and shot it on a 95-degree low pressure steam South Carolina day, and once you know, it didn't work. I came back to the shop and I put a heat gun up inside the action, and I heat gunned everything, and a thousandth of an inch that everything grew kept it from working. 3 swipes of the stone and I was out. So you got to have a little bit of air. This is not a machine tool. You bring this all the way down and shut, and that little bit of air right there. So now that brings us to the safety, and hang on, I'm going to pop this back open again. Right there, okay? Got that little bit of air, and we haven't taken the weight off the sears. The safety is just a piece that slips up in here. We don't even have to completely reassemble it to check this. But the safety, when that safety slides to the safe position, you see how the triggers just come forward just a little bit? So here we have slop, here we don't have any, right? Let me get that down. Here we have slop, and then when the safety's on, the slop is gone. And there it is. We've zeroed out the setup and forced the hammers to remain off when the safety is on. When the safety comes back forward again, now we have the ability, I got to get that a little bit further up. When the safety's forward, we have the ability now to drop the hammer. So, let me get this out of here because it's kind of in the way here. So, the big question becomes, will this trigger trip that hammer? And the answer is yes. Come back and reset, come down a little bit. How about that? There it is. The rest of it's cosmetics of making everything look pretty, and you don't do that until you're sure it's going to run. Gunsmithing, you always have to identify your critical flow path for work and work that first, because if you do everything else about the gun and that one critical thing blows up, you've expended all of that effort for nothing. Don't do that. All right, I'm going to get this thing put all the way back together again, and we're going to do a final check. So we put the fore end on it. You can see the fore end wood right up here. We've put the gun back together again. We put the screw back through the trunnion. We've done all that. With the gun shut, we can now see that we have the safety will pop back and forth, okay? And this hasn't been oiled. And not only hasn't it been oiled, but when we get done on this take, I'm going to show you that I have not pulled these 2 screws into full alignment yet, because this gun's coming apart 3, 4, 5 more times. I got to blew the trigger. There's a lot of things that have got to get done. But in this particular case, with the safety off, I want to show you something. As the top lever is moved, you'll see this lever right back here start to drive, and it pushes the safety to the on position. So that way, when the gun is open, the safety is on. Now, a lot of people hate these. If you're in a pure target environment, you're not out in the field, okay, the only time the gun is safe is when it's unloaded. I'll spot you that. However, this is here because, you know, out in the field, you're moving, you're walking, you're tired, it's like a rattle battle out there, and you got your finger on a trigger and you snap the gun shut, it will go off. So rather than that, they just turn the safety on all the time. You reload out in the field, and you got to remember to pop it forward. Beginning gunsmiths, don't remove this feature. Let somebody else do that. You're not the one that takes it out. Just leave that in. Don't neuter safety stuff. I'm not the safety weenie here, but just don't do that. All right, let's do one final check now. We cannot truly come off safe until we close the gun all the way up, and I don't want to drop the hammers. We come off safe and we verify that our little bit of rattle room is still there, just a little bit. And then we put the safety back on again and verify that our rattle room has disappeared. That's where we want to be on this thing, and it looks good. I'm going to pop the stock back on it. We're going to take it outside and pop around through it just to verify that it's going to go thump, and I think we're going to be good, and we did all that. So let's go pop a round or two through it and see what we got. Old equipment like this, the wood usually gives you away before the metal does. In this case, I think this gun had an articulated front trigger where the trigger will come forward and prevent you from messing up your finger. Well, guess what? You shouldn't have your finger that far up inside the trigger guard bow, okay? What the owner wanted was just a hard trigger and have the gun work again. The stock was cracked and did split all the way through. That's been worked on. Interest of full disclosure, this gun's already been fired a couple of times because I wanted to make sure that this forward trigger wasn't going to activate somehow, because when a gun like this doubles, you get it in two quick successions. It's not both barrels at once. It's one which precipitates the other, bap, like that. And that is absolutely murder on the wood. But I think we've had a successful repair. Yeah, that's my two, man. I'll see you later for the outro. Outstanding. You guys can do this kind of stuff. It's simple metal fitting. But the big deal we had here is what order do we do all of this in? That's the big thing, is figuring out how you're going to get to where you want to be from where you are using the materials and resources that you have. It can be done. Some of us have just done it longer than others, I think. And just remember, Bob's your uncle.